Hi all, I'm Professor Tina Good, and this mini video will seek to give some explanation of some very complicated concepts that we need to begin to understand in order to, enjoy, interpret, and further understand some of the pieces that we are working on this semester, as well as just in general. When you are consuming movies or other kinds of literature, plays, television, podcasts. These are very important concepts within our culture. Okay, and so this video is going to be taking a look at satire as a genre, parody, and irony. Okay, so I'm not going to get into, really complicated ideas of these, which easily we could do and you might do in later classes. But I just want to give you sort of a foundational understanding so that we can move forward and begin to recognize these moments in some of the works that we're reading. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've developed a bit of a PowerPoint for you here um, to begin to help us maybe provide some definitions, rudimentary as they are, but I'm hoping that they will help you understand these ideas a little bit more. Okay, so the first one that I want to talk to you about is satire as a genre. Now, this is going to be pretty much talking about satire as a literary genre, but satire is pretty much in everything that we consume through media or art. Okay, so satire we can see in music, we can see it in the visual arts, we can see it in commercials, we can see it in the news. And so satire is, very much a part of, our culture. But I'm going to be speaking to you today specifically about it as a literary form. Okay. And so satire is a genre that's generally created, the pieces within it are generally created to expose what could be or is considered by that particular author to be harmful beliefs or practices within the society. Okay, it is also generally supposed to, by exposing these things to inspire change and therefore hope. But truthfully, satire can also be so cynical that it may just suggest that the society, with regard to these issues, is just um, beyond hope. Okay, at least within the current generation. Satire is, by definition, a subversive genre. That is to say, that satire usually underneath all of what is going on within the story or the art form, there is a hidden message. Although for some, really, it may not be that hidden. Satire is often considered to be a genre that is what we call singing to the choir or singing to what we call like minds, right? And so people who are opposed to these ideas being considered harmful, um, that's not really the audience for the satirical piece. Not really. Of course, there is the hope that the satire may change some minds or by exposing certain things, get people to think about things differently. Always the hope of art. But particularly with satire, it's kind of targeted to people who think similarly and therefore are kind of building, a larger group to get behind this, whatever the issue might be. Okay. Satire often uses the following techniques. They don't have to use all of them. They generally use at least one of them. Um, But here are some that we often find in satire. Okay, humor, parody, irony, or sarcasm or wit. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about these things. So humor, you guys all know what humor is that thing that makes us laugh, haha. Humor is not a requirement of satire, but it often is within satire. Okay, humor is often used to subvert the message and turn a drama into comedy. Okay, so the issues being discussed, if there wasn't humor, or sometimes sarcasm, it would be a very heavy and dramatic piece of work. Okay, but the humor lightens it up, um, and therefore attracts audiences that may not necessarily come to this. Um, but that humor, while it may inspire laughter, especially to the choir, the audience is often uncomfortable with that laughter. They realize that even while they are laughing, that maybe they should not be laughing. Sometimes this is called dark humor, um, but it is sort of this uncomfortableness, like, it's tapping into, some sort of moral qualms within us, or some sort of like societal issues that we're uncomfortable with as a culture, and it's hitting that. And while we're laughing, we feel like, maybe we should not be laughing, right? Um, that types of humor that are included in satire often include this thing that we call sarcasm or wit. Um, Sarcasm is that thing that is generally, mocking of something, or someone, right? Double entendre. Double entendre is usually some kind of sexual reference, right? That is on one level, but those of us who understand, the language a little bit more, we might get the sexual reference. Double entendre doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. It could be something that is kind of, taboo in the culture itself. Maybe it's drug related or something like that, where only the groups particular in that audience will kind of get the double entendre. Others will go right over their heads. Okay. Often in satire, there is that slapstick, people falling down, people, slipping on a banana peel, like that kind of thing, or very, very physical humor. Whether it's body, bodily expression, such, like that, or, running into a door or something like that, some kind of physical humor or bodily humor. Okay. Um, Parody. I'm going to get into parody a little bit more when I get to the examples, but parody is generally what we consider an imitation of a particular genre, right? It's actually imitating a particular genre, but it is exaggerating elements of that genre. And that exaggeration uh, may, not necessarily, but it may provide comic effect for us that causes us to laugh. But the point of it is inevitably mocking the genre that it is imitating. Okay, irony. Perhaps one of the hardest concepts to understand for us is irony, often because it is used incorrectly. We say, "Oh, that's ironic," and we really mean it's sarcastic. But irony is things that we use in literature often to sort of highlight something in a way that makes us think about it in a deeper way. Okay. So what is irony? There's a lot of different kinds of irony, and I'm not going to go over all of that because it would just be boring for you. You could take a whole class, graduate class on irony if you wanted to. But let me just show a couple of the things that we think about within satire. There's irony, just in general, the word irony, right? Sometimes it's called verbal irony. And it is an expression that somehow signifies the opposite meaning of what is being said. So, like if you're on stage, right? You might signal like, "Oh, he's a nice guy." Right? And what we mean is like, he's not a nice guy. And we get that maybe from tone of voice, right? Oh, he's a nice guy, right? Or maybe if you're reading it, the nice guy has just done something that's not nice. And a character might say, well, that was nice, right? You getting it? So there's this signal that what's being said, right, is not the truth, but it is the opposite of that. Okay. Um, Dramatic irony is often used, and that is that the audience knows something that the characters do not know. And so that causes us to have, suspense or discomfort. The characters are generally making decisions with, the lack of this knowledge. And this causes the audience to be concerned or perhaps to laugh, depending on what is going on, because we know what's going to happen. One of the examples I use for dramatic irony all the time is, the movie Titanic, where Jack wins the card game that gets him the tickets on the Titanic. And he says, you know, this is the luckiest day of my life. And the audience is like cringing because we know what's going to happen to the Titanic. He does not know as a character. We know, right? And we're like, oh, this is not his lucky day, right? So that's dramatic irony. Things we know that the character doesn't know, right? Um, okay, so let me give you some examples of satire that you may or may not be familiar with, right? The probably the most famous one in literature is this essay called "A Modest Proposal" by Jonathan Swift, and I don't know if you've read this in previous um, life, but "A Modest Proposal" is a parody, really, a satire of critical essays, where they're the children, in Ireland are starving, and so this essay is written to say, well, in order to solve this food shortage problem, let's kill the children and eat them. Now, Jonathan Swift does not mean that at all, right? And if we don't get that this is satire, we're going to read this as a, provocative and gruesome essay, which, is intended to be that way. Um, but it's also meant to provoke the society into finding new ways, right, to solve the starvation problem. Simultaneously, however, it's also mocking reason, right? This idea of using reason without using emotion, right, to solve the problem of starving children. Perhaps one that you're more familiar with is the franchise Scream movie franchise, which generally parodies horror movies. Perhaps all of you know of Shrek, right, which parodies fairy tales, right? It is a fairy tale, but it challenges the ideas of the fairy tales, right? So we have like the ogre becomes the prince who rescues the princess, right? And that's not supposed to be who's rescuing the princess. And then, of course, it's challenging ideas of beauty and all of those things that go along with the idea of being a princess. And so Shrek is really challenging, not only the idea of the fairy tale, but also social constructs of what it means to, you know, uh, the class structures, these ideas of beauty, and all of those kinds of things, right? Another parody that you might be familiar with is the movie Isn't It Romantic, which parodies the idea of romantic comedies. And, again, challenging these ideas of beauty, but how it's connected to love. the idea of how one falls in love. The Thanksgiving play is a play that is a parody of school plays that often, and maybe you were in this, the school plays of elementary schools that put on, that sort of traditional story of the Thanksgiving play, and yet shows how problematic, right, that is when we start looking at what actually happened historically. Knives Out, you may know that movie is a parody of murder mysteries. And Shakespeare's Sonnet 130 is a parody of sonnets themselves, or these idea of love poems. So I thought, this is a short example that I thought, we could look at real quickly. So I'm going to stop sharing this particular screen and go to another screen that shows us the sonnet. Okay. All right. So here we go. It says, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun." So right away, we start seeing how this particular sonnet is challenging poets, right, who over embellish, right, the beauty of who the poem is directed at, right? "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red," right? "If snow be white, then her breasts are done." Right. So it's this idea, right? It's like, no, they're not as white as snow, right? In fact, they're done. And she's got black wires coming out of her head, right? This is not an attractive picture of a woman, right? But notice it is, following the rules of the sonnet, right? It has a rhyme scheme following the rules of the sonnet. It's 14 lines following the rules of the sonnet, right? Um, but it's beginning to challenge these ideas of what it means to be beautiful and that connection between love and beauty. And yet it is, emphasizing some ideas that, we might laugh at, right? Um, and in some perfumes, is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks, right? We might start laughing about that, right? And yet, as we're doing that laughing, we might be, uncomfortable with that because we know, right, that we're laughing, right, at whoever this poem is directed to, and it should be we be laughing, right? And truthfully, in Renaissance times, probably breath wasn't that great, right? And then at the bottom, though, we come back, and yet by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. I love her, no matter, how beautiful she is, that I love her, despite that. And so there's this challenge, right, to the sonnet writers, to, poems, um, songwriters, right, to that idea of, this intertwining of, the social construct of beauty and what it means to love, right? And so that gives us some idea of a satire, some idea of a parody, and some idea, of how humor and irony is used. So I hope this video begins to help you understand these complicated, literary and artistic forms so that we can enjoy and appreciate literature, art, music, etc., um, as we go through our lives. Okay, have a good day.